Hi, so if you missed today's class with the two new ballads that we did, Bonny George Campbell and Bonny Barbara Allan, we spent the first half of class reviewing the last ballad, Get Up and Bar the Door. So you don't really need to make up anything from that other than just to make sure you understand that poem. And then for these two, I figured I could read it with you on this Google Meet so you could understand what was happening. And then if there's any other questions that you have, you can come and talk to me. We'll do a little activity next class to go over both of these. So the first one's called Bonny George Campbell. You can find it on the PDF that I posted on the Google Classroom. They're both very short ballads. High upon highlands and low upon Tay, Bonny George Campbell rode out on a day. He saddled, he bridled, and gallant rode he, and home came his good horse, but never came he. So right from those first two stanzas, we know that Bonny George Campbell is dead. He went off on his horse one day, his horse came back, but he did not. So we find out very quickly, it's very sudden, this information, this disaster of George Campbell being dead. Out came his mother dear, greeting Fussair, and out came his bonny bride, riving her hair. And we can see down at the bottom what both of those terms mean, because you probably have no idea what greeting Fussair or riving her hair is. So his mother is greeting Fussair. She's weeping uncontrollably. This is a dry, heaving, weeping, very, 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 very emotional cry. And his bonny bride, his beautiful wife, is riving her hair. Riving means tearing. So she's literally so distraught, she's pulling out her own hair. So they are both very, very upset. His mother is crying, his wife is tearing out her own hair. The meadow lies green, the corn is unshorn, but Bonny George Campbell will never return. Saddled and bridled and booted rode he, a plume in his helmet, a sword at his knee. But empty came his saddle, all bloody to see. Oh, home came his good horse, but never came he. So we find out from these last few lines, how did he probably die? Right here. So he goes off on his horse. He's got a feather in his helmet, a sword at his knee, and his horse comes back with a bloody saddle. So we can probably assume that he died in battle. He set off to fight, to go into the war, and he died, and his horse came back, and he didn't. So after we read that, that's it. That's the whole entire poem. We took a couple of minutes just to answer some very easy recall questions to make sure we were all on the same page. So for example, what happens to George? He dies. He dies specifically in battle, we find out by the end of the poem. How does his family react? His mother, crying uncontrollably. His wife is literally pulling out her hair. She's so distraught. And this one's a little bit more of a deep thinker question. It would be a great multiple choice question on a test. What is the stark contrast or striking difference within the ballad? So for example, in a different poem, not this one, a stark contrast or a striking difference might be light and dark would be a stark contrast. There are some things that are really light in the poem and some things that are really dark in the poem. So keeping that in mind, what could we say would be a stark contrast in this poem? The answer, the best answer, would be life and death. There's a huge contrast between those very opposite things. And if you think about it, there's a lot of examples of these. What is alive in the poem? His horse, his mom, his wife. They even spend a stanza talking about the grass that's growing, the corn that's ready to be harvested. Life is going on, and what is dead? George Campbell. So there's this big contrast between the things that are alive in the poem, several of them they mention, and then he himself who is dead. All right, then we read the second one called Bonny Barbara Allan, which is on the next page of that PDF. And Bonny just means like lad or lass, just a general term for a person dependent on their gender is spelled differently. Bonny with an I-E, Bonny with a Y. So this one's about a girl named Barbara Allan. It was in and about the Martinmas time. We know what Martinmas is from Get Up and Bar the Door. It was November, when the green leaves were a-fallen, that Sir John Graham in the West Country fell in love with Barbara Allan. So we know from that first stanza who our two main characters are. We have John Graham is our guy, and Barbara Allan is our girl. He sent his men down through the town to the place where she was dwelling. Oh, haste and come to my master dear, gin ye be Barbara Allan. So he is referring to John Graham. He sends down one of his guys, his friends, to the place where Barbara Allan was living. And this is what he says. Oh, hurry up and come to my master. Come to see John Graham. If you be Barbara Allan. We see down here that gin means if. So he says, hey, if you're Barbara Allan, come see my dude. He's looking for you. Oh, hooly rose she up to the place where he was lying. And when she drew the curtain by, she said, young man, I think you're dying. So hooly means slowly. So she takes her sweet time. She gets up. She makes her way to where John Graham is laying down. And when she pulls back the curtain, what does she say? I think you're dying. He does not look good. He seems very sickly. And so that's the first thing that she says when she sees him. And he replies, oh, I'm sick and very, very sick. And it's afore Barbara Allan. Oh, the better for me ye's never be, though your heart's blood were a spilling. So ignoring the last couple of lines that are a little bit weirdly worded, the highlighted part gives it away. What is he sick over? Barbara Allan. He is literally so lovesick for her, so in love with her that he's making himself physically ill. He is dying over his love for her, over their heartbreak, over not having her, basically. And she replies, after his proclamation of love, she says, oh, dinna ye mind, which down here means don't you remember? Oh, don't you remember, young man, said she, when the red wine ye were filling, that ye made the hates go round and round, and slighted Barbara Allan. So how does she respond to his proclamation of love? She says, don't you remember when you had a little too much red wine to drink and you slighted Barbara Allan? What does that mean, to slight someone? To diss, to snub, to be rude to them. So apparently one time he was drunk on red wine and he snubbed or slighted Barbara Allan. He dissed her in some way. And so she rejects his proclamation of love and says, even though he is dying over how much he loves her, she says, well, yeah, that one time you were rude to me, so nope. He turned his face into the wall and death was with him dealing. Adieu, adieu, my dear friends all, and be kind to Barbara Allan. So he literally says, okay, guess I'm going to die now then, since you won't be with me. And he turns to face the wall, turns away from her and says, goodbye, goodbye, sweet world, and be kind to Barbara Allan. Those are his dying words, is for everyone to treat her with respect, even though she's the reason that he's dying. And slowly, slowly raised she up, and slowly, slowly left him. And sighing said she could not stay, since death of life had reft him. So he says he's going to die, and she says, okay. And she gets up to leave, kind of takes a big sigh. I can't stay here for this. Probably thinks he's being dramatic, which he is, being incredibly dramatic. And so she gets up, and she leaves, and she heads out. She had not gained a mile or two when she heard the dead bell ringing. And every jowl that the dead bell gied, it cried woe to Barbara Allan. So she doesn't make it very far when she hears the dead bell ringing. If you remember from the Partner's Tale, when that coffin goes by, they ring a bell to signify that someone has died. So she doesn't make it far, and she hears that he has died. He literally died over his heartbreak and how much he was in love with her, and she rejected him. And every jowl, every ringing of that bell is like a dagger to the heart for Barbara Allan. She is so distraught that this has happened. So she did probably love him. She obviously feels badly about what happened, that she was being kind of stubborn or petty and rejected him because of that one time he was rude. So she says, oh, mother, mother, make my bed. Oh, make it soft and narrow. Since my love died for me today, I'll die for him tomorrow. They buried her in the old churchyard, and Sir John's grave was nigh her. And from his heart grew a red, red rose, and from her heart a briar. They grew to the top of the old church wall, till they could grow no higher, until they tied a true love's knot, the red rose and the briar. So as soon as she hears what's happened to John Graham, she literally says, okay, Mom, make up my deathbed. Since he died for me today, I'll die for him tomorrow. So she's not committing suicide. She's just also so heartbroken over what happened to him and feeling so guilty that she just dies. Same as him. And the very next stanza, she's dead. They buried her next to him in the old churchyard, and from his grave grew a red rose, and from her grave grew a briar, which is like a thorn bush. And the two plants grow higher and higher and higher until they intertwine and they form a true love's knot. And so they are together in the end via plant. So again, just like the last poem, I had a couple of questions for them after reading. What ailment or what sickness is John Graham suffering from? Love sickness, a broken heart. He is so in love with Barbara Allan that it is causing him to be physically ill. How does Barbara Allan react to his proclamation of love? She rejects him. Why? Because that one time he slighted or snubbed her at a bar. He was rude to her at a bar. What happens to him? He dies. He literally dies of a broken heart. What happens to her? She also dies over her guilt and her broken heart over him being dead, even though she was the one to cause it. And then lastly, what happens to the both of them? How are they together in the end? A red rose grows from his grave, a briar or thorn bush grows from hers, and they intertwine into a true love's knot. Something I asked them to think about in class, why is he the flower and she's the thorn bush? Usually we would think the woman would be, the soft, delicate flower. And they all pretty much agreed that she was the one that was rude or ruined this relationship. She was the harsh, painful one, and he was the soft, delicate creature that died over a broken heart. So he gets to be the flower, and she is the thorn bush in that scenario. But they're technically together in the end. And then lastly, I asked them to think about how both of these ballads fit the characteristics of what we said makes up a ballad. So this is something that we reviewed with Get Up and Bar the Door earlier in class today, and something that I would say would be a good thing for you to know for your test next week. So we'll take a medieval test next week, and an essay question I might ask you would be to pick one of these three ballads, Get Up and Bar the Door, Bonny George Campbell, and Bonny Barbara Allan, and tell me how it fits these characteristics. So there are technically 5 total that you could say, because there's 2 different literary devices. I would say knowing at least 3 of them to be able to identify that in the ballads would be a perfect way to answer this question. So something that they said, number 1's pretty straightforward. Both of the poems, Bonny George Campbell and Bonny Barbara Allan, and Get Up and Bar the Door, are about the everyday life of the common people. This isn't, a knight slaying a dragon or the king and the queen and the nobility telling the story. These are just average people. All 3 of these have very tragic themes to them. And I asked them, from the examples that I gave of these tragic themes, which one would you assign to each poem? And so most people said that Get Up and Bar the Door, we could say, is sudden disaster. They are almost killed by these robbers coming into their house. Some people even said jealousy or disappointed love or revenge, because there is not a good relationship in Get Up and Bar the Door. Clearly not a great marriage, and they're very petty against each other. That's why they said revenge, not jealousy. For the 2 that we read today, Bonny George Campbell, definitely sudden disaster. He is dead at the beginning of the poem. You could say disappointed love. His bride is obviously very distraught and upset that her husband is dead, but I feel like that would be the best tragic theme. For Bonny Barbara Allan, disappointed love is probably the best of those to pick from. They don't get to really be together in the end except as plants. It's a very disappointed love. They die because of their love. All of them use these literary devices as well. They all use a narrative, a single incident told in a dramatic fashion. All of them tell a very short story, a single incident, and it's done quickly and dramatically. I would say all of them are very dramatic in their retellings. Refrain, we can definitely see in Get Up and Bar the Door and Bonny Barbara Allan. I think you can make the case for Bonny George Campbell, but it's so short that it's a little more difficult. But Get Up and Bar the Door, they repeat bar the door over and over again. So the husband tells the wife to bar the door, get up and bar the door. She says, for barring of the door, you can wait 100 years. Both of them don't want to speak for barring of the door. So that phrase of bar the door is repeated over and over. In Bonny Barbara Allan, her name is a refrain. They repeat for Barbara Allan, Barbara Allan, Barbara Allan numerous times throughout the poem. And then lastly, all of them are musical in nature. Even as I read them, you can kind of hear the sing-songy quality to them. They have a rhythm, obviously a rhyme scheme, that they were meant to be turned into song. So that's all you would need to say on a test, is just be able to identify, particularly with number 1 and number 4 of these examples, all you would need to say is that it does apply. You don't have to prove to me that it's musical other than to say that there's a sing-songy, rhymey rhythm quality to it. All right, we'll do an activity next class with these 2 poems, but that's all that you needed, is to be able to know what happened in both of those. It is super important that you know that, because the activity that we'll do next class, you cannot do unless you know what occurred in those 2 poems. So thank you for watching this. If you have any questions or you need to ask me anything to clarify, don't hesitate to do that. Send me an email. You will have a test sometime next week, so you want to jot down anything that you want to use on the test. It's open notes again. So even these 2 poems that we read and just kind of going over those questions, if you want to jot any of that down, might be a smart thing to do. Okay, that's it. Have a great day. Make good choices. Thanks for watching.